Hello everybody and welcome to the most controversial She-Ra change from She-Ra and the Princesses of Power, the 2018 remake of the 1985 series She-Ra, the Princess of Power. If you can tell by the thumbnail, this video is going to be about Bow. So, why is Bow the most controversial character? Because he's black. Not just that he's black, a lot of people who don't understand representation they kind of pass it off as tokenism, and that's a little bit of what this video is going to be about. And because we're covering such a heated topic, and this is a topic that was very talked about in 2018 among the release of the Black Panther movie, because I'm going to be discussing later in this video how white culture has helped to erase black culture. Well, I guess help is the wrong word. I will be discussing how white culture erases black culture and makes it seem like there is no difference between like black and white society. Ha ha ha, funny joke. That makes a lot of white people perception of racial changes in shows like She-Ra and the Princess of Power. They just kind of see it for like a superficial thing. Like they don't realize that there's any difference between black and white social economic pressures. We have Black History Month for a reason, not just to talk about, oh, all the slavery that used to happen. But people don't know very much about black culture and how it developed in America specifically. Not only because that information was lost when the ancestors were brought over as slaves, but because there has been a conscious effort from the political right to try to rewrite black American culture. This is a huge reason why if you come across like a black conservative political influencer, they love to talk about fatherhood and Christianity and just religion and how to follow that. But we don't find nearly as many people who are vocal about the African heritage and all the systems and beliefs and the practices have been going on for thousands of years. Because a lot of that history is lost and it's not taught in schools, you have to go out of your way to find it and read up about it. For example, Jim Crow was abolished in the mid-60s, but a lot of schools that had pretty much almost exclusively black children, because there was no effort on the government's behalf to make racial diversity across schools whatsoever. That is only a recent phenomenon, which is where like tokenism in terms of jobs happen, because they're like, oh, this person, you two have almost equal qualifications, but because this person's black or Mexican or Asian, we're gonna give them the job instead. So a lot of white people feel personally attacked because of hiring practices like this. But I'm not here to talk about that, only acknowledge that this is a thing, because it matters in terms of tokenism, because tokenism is like the bare minimum of pretending to care about cultural and racial inclusivity. You know, like on Pride Month, some businesses change their icons to the rainbow flag because they're like, oh, we're being inclusive, when changing an icon to another icon is the most bare minimum thing you can do. I mean, I guess it's technically right to call out the businesses and be like, hey, you actually don't care, don't pretend like you do, but I would rather have businesses spending millions of dollars on advertising pro-queer culture than not. And I would rather them do that than the opposite. So when a bunch of straight white dudes saw Bow get changed from a white dude to a black dude, and end of story, I guess. A lot of them were really mad because it's like, oh, it's just tokenism, it's just Netflix changing the skin color of a character to pretend that they care about racial inclusivity and care about black people, because this is the easiest way for them to cater to black audiences rather than like actually do anything for black people. They just say, we hear you and we care about you, so we're gonna have a black character in our new TV show so you feel seen. But if we take a look at history and Bow as a character, when we break him down, he's actually, I think he's just one of the best forms of representation in the entire show. He's so underappreciated, and because a lot of people don't know the history, they just see him, he was white, now he is black. They don't know the cultural effects or how the character's behavior is much more progressive than just this character is black now. This video is all about exploring Bow as a character and just revealing to everybody how he might actually be the best representation in the entire show, which is already full of representation and people love for that, but everybody gets like hung up on like, oh, the lesbians and like the body types. It's like, no, can we talk about some of the racial representation here? This is also kind of profound. That's the introduction. I was also going to put like a disclaimer, like a warning towards the beginning, be like, hey, we're going to be talking about racism, we're going to be talking about homophobia, and you might be like, why are we talking about homophobia? Bo isn't gay. Bo's parents are gay, and Bo also has a lot of flamboyant traits, which is part of what makes him really good representation. And we're going to talk a lot about masculinity, and we're going to talk about white versus black versus white racial wars, and it's just going there's going to be a lot of issues. And for a while, when I was writing this script, I wrote 10,000 other words, and I was like, this is too long. I didn't want to read 10,000 words on one character, one of the characters that I think the audience of She-Ra actually doesn't care that much about, but I think it's just because they don't know enough about Bo and black culture and masculinity to fully appreciate Bo, and I'm not sure if the writers were intending to go as deep with Bo as they ended up doing, because they just did it on accident, I think. I'm not entirely sure about that. I haven't seen too many interviews about Bo's design, because people... I hate to say it, but I don't think the audience of She-Ra and the Princesses of Power really cares that much about Bo. I love Bo. He's such an amazing character, and I am finally taking time to talk about why that is, and I'm so excited. Anyways, warning out of the way. Now we can discuss why tokenism made Bo extra controversial. I discussed this a little bit in the introduction, but the reason why tokenism made Bo controversial is because a lot of white people in America don't understand that black culture in America is different from white culture in America. And they don't understand how white culture kind of tried to force its way into black culture and like change it, you know, kind of like how when Americans came to North America and they took the native tribes and they literally made an attempt to extinguish their culture completely. And the same thing happened through slavery. But even then, as slaves were liberated, white people still tried to stop all that from happening. Even though Jim Crow ended, the crack cocaine epidemic, that was a government plan to take black people and lock them in jail en masse because they predominantly voted left-wing and conservative politicians didn't like that. And so crack cocaine, which if you don't know, the basic rundown is cocaine is just like powderized crack basically, or like slightly different. But cocaine, if you were caught with cocaine, it was like barely even a crime. But crack was years and years of prison time. Then they had the DARE program. Government officials would go into black neighborhoods and try to get communities hooked on the substance, and then they would be caught with it and arrested. So this led to an overall distrust of all authority figures, basically. So as black communities grew to distrust the authority figures, that led to self-policing communities, which unfortunately, that started to lead to black on black crime, which as soon as that happened, that was blasted through the political airwaves to be like, see, black people are violent, eugenics, and all these arguments to paint black people as having degenerate culture and to portray them as inferior beings who, if you let black people be, they'll just become violent instigators. So that bred a lot of racism. And that started to market hood culture. And rap music became an issue because pushed by the powers at be to become the staple music genre from said communities. It was used to continue to paint black people in a very negative light. If the powers that be create this whole atmosphere of hood culture is black culture, which, as we've established, is dangerous because it perpetuates black on black crime, which gives the police a reason to lock up more black people, which this was a concerted effort by business owners and lawmakers to make black culture look nasty and gross and to prevent education about that. Because what are you going to do? Are we going to talk about, like, people committing hate crimes on their own people?
Our leader, Bob Johnson, had a dream of creating a network that would accomplish what hundreds of years of slavery, Jim Crow, and malt liquor couldn't. The destruction of black people!
Yo, sister.
Is that so hard?
Mistress Leeville, since BET came into existence, terrible things have happened to black people.
We don't tend to know how much history came out of, like, Louisiana and jazz, for an example. People, they have this idea in their minds because of pop culture forcing it down their throats that black culture is just guns, drugs, crime. So whenever a character shows up on screen, it's always like this caricature. If you've seen the Boondocks anime, you'll know that it was satirizing this pop culture perspective of what black communities were like. So nowadays, if there's a black culture in media that doesn't fit this hoodlum stereotype, they just look at it like tokenism. And because Bo is not this caricature of black media, Bo is just a person. So to them, it's just like, okay, we just blackwash this character and calling it representation when it's actually very good. Like, if they just stopped there, this would already be really good, that they're opening the box and breaking away from this negative stereotype that has been painted for the past 40 years. There's an episode in Boondocks where Huey is pointing out how the people who run, like, the black media television want to perpetuate this kind of image of black culture.
BET, slap it right on the ceiling over the crib. By the time that nigga's 12, he'll be watching it in jail. Ha ha ha! BET forever!
Surprised you guys haven't given him a show.
So not only that, but you might think, why is Bo hanging out with all these other people? It seems kind of weird that he's like the one black guy of the group, right? Wouldn't that be kind of weird? It's just diversity. We're having people from each of these different ethnicities and shoving together into the Princess Alliance because we need somebody of every single race and culture to appeal to the broader demographic, which, okay, I can't speak on the other princesses, but this actually makes perfect sense for Bo. As part of this is people within black communities, if they did not fall in line and behave in the way of the culture, they would be ostracized because there's this such distrust among black people of white people, especially white authority figures, that if you're acting too white or like sympathetic to the white man or police officers in some cases, then you are ostracized from your own community. And this is where, for black people who, like, maybe they have a white mother or a white father and they're very light-skinned and they receive racism from black people with a darker complexion because they're mocked for being too white, and so maybe they're pushed out of groups for not being black enough. But then they're not really welcomed into white culture because, oh, they're black. And so they're like hoodlums because this whole idea of what being a black person is has been tainted their minds for the past decades. And so it makes it really hard for people who are like in that middle ground between white and black to have an easier time growing up. So a lot of these people will fall into one group or another. They'll find a place where they're accepted. But this is often why there will be some black people who are amongst white people who are very light-skinned. And this would make sense for Bo. Not only that, if they do not fall into the culture, there was a bit in Boondocks where one of the characters says that the bass could be louder in this one rapper's song, and then he basically gets kicked out of the group.
I would just turn up the bass a little higher in the monitor speakers.
Fuck you, hating ass nigga! Don't nobody give a fuck what your dumb ass think. Give me this motherfucker.
This is like commentary about how if you do not adhere to the culture and participate in it, then you will be kicked out of it. And Bo, as somebody who, as we've established, does not fit the hoodlum stereotype, would probably not be welcomed in a lot of black spaces on the basis of he acts too white. Which makes perfect sense why when he joins up with the Princess Alliance, he's kind of like the only black person there because he doesn't fit in anywhere else. So I just find it perfect that this is the case. The fact that he is black and there's not a lot of other black people in his group. That's a weird way to say it.
I'm extremely sorry for my actions.
But we're not done yet. There's still another part that I really like about him. And this one does have to do with the fact that he loves having an exposed midriff. So we've already talked about if you don't fall in line with this negative stereotype in black culture, you can get pushed out. Part of that has to do with masculinity and misogyny.
It was clear that the love of the male form as we know it was a male product. Now, I'm not saying women and femmes aren't into strong athletic bodies, but the hyperfixation and goal of achieving the peak male form was and still is for the male gaze. Ironic considering the latent homophobia of gym culture, but a bit on that more later.
So I'm pretty sure we all know that something Bible says women obey your husband, the man is in charge of the household, blah blah blah, whatever these regressive ideas are about like how the world and families should work. But even with that aside, we look at things historically, a lot of men who have ran society view like strength, physical prowess, your body's being sculpting your body into a work of art. Hence the whole like bodybuilding thing comes from. And why, if as a guy, the bigger your beard is, the shorter your hair is, the bigger your muscles are, the higher people view you on the societal totem pole because you appear more masculine than other men. And why people who maybe they have long hair or they don't grow a lot of facial hair can get bullied a lot more in male environments. So part of this is because masculinity, to be like a masculine male, you need to be capable of being like a protector, physically fit. Because what if there's like a bear or like a crazy guy? You need to be able to defend your wife. You need to be able to defend your kids, even though firearms are the great equalizer, so physical strength shouldn't necessarily matter anymore.
If your tribe or group had sturdy, nimble hunters and gatherers, chances were you would weather the tough times better when food was particularly scarce. As societies blossomed and made the transition to farming and animal husbandry, we found ourselves with more free time on our hands. And what did we do with it? Well, we got into games and sports, of course.
Culture and society have not let this behind. So MMA, boxing, basketball, all these sports have still gone to be like, oh, if you are an elite at a specific sport, then that is good. That makes you more masculine. And part of that is because testosterone helps promote like muscle growth, or at least allows people with a lot of testosterone to put on muscle a little easier versus people with a lot of estrogen. And so women have always been viewed as inferior throughout history for having less capable bodies in that sense.
Physical strength has always been used to justify violence and other forms of oppression. It's a very common defense of indigenous genocide and the colonization of the West Indies.
Because men could physically overpower women throughout history, men would just generally make the rules. So women were subjected to a lot and treated as property and just generally viewed as lesser beings throughout history, which a lot of that is based upon physical. But we see Bo he's tall, he's very strong. He could actually be stronger than Adora despite her being an elite of the Horde military. So what about him is lacking of masculinity? His outfits. Because women throughout society have decided to they must appeal to men in specific ways. One of those was through more of the arts, makeup, clothing, dancing, different ways to attract a high-value male. But the point still stands that there are some things that were picked up in feminine culture that have just persisted, and clothing is a big aspect of that. Because clothing is something that boys are not concerned about, because you should be worried about muscles and your behavior. Bo, the way he behaves, the way he speaks, the things that he cares about, his mannerisms, all lean more towards feminine than masculine. And partially his dress code as well. The way that he dresses is more feminine than a lot of male characters. So because men would see him as less masculine, therefore lower on the societal totem pole.
For males who identify as men, the worst thing that you can do is strip them of their masculinity, because it is in essence stripping them of their humanity in this patriarchal society.
It would also make sense that he would be pushed out of these groups, especially ones that are hypermasculine, like more black communities. And part of that is also as a result of social conditioning. Like, basketball is way more popular in black culture. And in white culture, it's much more football. And in Mexican culture, they care more about baseball. Also, please understand that I'm speaking in like broad terms, and this is one of the talking points that Ben Shapiro was like, oh, well, if you want like equality or whatever, then why don't we take a bunch of black people out of the NBA and put a bunch of white dudes in there? It's like, okay, yeah, there's a lot of black people in sports. A big part of that is because black culture cares a lot about athleticism and your masculinity, and that is why there's a lot of bullying in the black community for not being manly enough. So because of the social pressures and this more athletic culture, black communities generally have more masculinity, which is really weird to say, but masculinity in black communities is much more important than it is in white communities, because amongst like white people, amongst Christians and Catholics, this is like the expectation, and you'll be harassed for not falling in line. But if everything that I mentioned about being feminine is exasperated, and who was it? Somebody. I'm leaving a link to another video in the description where there's another Boondocks episode that is all about like calling out the rampant homophobia in the black community, analyzing it through Riley's perspective. I do encourage you to go check it out because it's really interesting.
And something he also gets from TV is his use of homophobic language. He does this because, similar to what the media has told him, you can't be a thug and do anything remotely gay. You can't be a rapper and be gay. You can't be cool and be gay. You can't associate with the idea of homosexuality, otherwise you yourself are gay.
Homophobia and misogyny is even worse in black communities than it is amongst white people. And a very quick example is if you just look at like the top 5 songs of like any rap artist, there's probably a lot of objectifying or just like anti-women lyrics in like one of their 5 most played songs, versus if you look at any like rock band or metal band, you'll probably find some, but you're gonna find way less lyrics that are just degrading towards women. There is a lot of country music that also is misogynistic and degrading towards women, but not as severe as rap music, and this is normal. Coinciding with that, a lot of music, or more like white culture, it views women as something to be like protected and cherished. But then you listen to rap music, and I wouldn't blame you if you thought that women were literally at the bottom of the social economic ladder, because if you follow Judeo-Christian values, women are valued, they're just not valued as much as men.
I am so effing tired of the amount of emotional labor that comes with dating black men.
A woman is going viral for saying she's not going to date black men anymore, and she's actually getting support for saying it. Let's talk about it.
So I was just recording this for the video, but I find it fucking hilarious that the PragerU logo is like in an anti-black men video. The misogyny and homophobia is even worse among black communities because masculinity is more exaggerated, and media has been pushing a much more violent culture on black people for the past 40 years. So Bo, a character who is just more feminine and more in touch with his emotions and very expressive. In fact, I think he's one of the only characters where his emotions are never the conflict of a single episode. Whereas if we look at Adora and Catra, their inability to talk things out about their Horde versus Rebellion thing, this spans across all 5 seasons, and the show could have ended much sooner if they stopped to talk things out. And Glimmer's lack of emotional depth and the ability to like communicate her feelings and deal with them, that results in the conflict of many episodes. And there's even a point where Bo, in Princess Prom, he stands up for himself and was like, Glimmer, what you're doing right now is like emotionally manipulative, and I cannot condone this behavior.
I forgive you. You forgive me? Glimmer, I'm allowed to hang out with other people.
But
Don't you see?
Oh, it's great. So, in masculine culture, there's a lot of stoicism, which is like emotions are just a burden, something to be overcome and stuff deep down. And if your emotions overcome you and you feel it or whatever, this is bad. You're a weak man for giving into your emotions. And Bo does the opposite. He embraces his emotions and he is better for it, and he shows all the characters around him their inability to embrace and deal with their emotions makes them worse, as like it makes them worse people. We see Catra is the most obvious example of this because she can't deal with any emotions, none of them. Scorpia handles all of her emotions really well. She's just really gullible and becomes a living doormat for Catra, and that becomes her issue, but that's just because she's dumb. Versus Bo, he understands that there is toxic things going on around him, and he is working to make the situation better all the time, and he's emotionally and understands that. And because a lot of masculine culture treats emotions as a negative thing that pulls you down and something to be fought back against and buried, that creates a lot of awful things. And because a lot of gay men, they embrace their emotions and feelings and learning how to deal with them and how to become better people for having them, and that is considered not masculine at all, and so it is punished. So Bo, as a character who's more in touch with himself in this regard, with his emotions, understanding how to deal with them and how to grow as a person of it, he would also be pushed out of masculine spaces for being too feminine, even though this is just a toxic idea that, like, red pillars, for example, need to, like, oh, you can't, don't be bothered by anything. That's not how the bodies and the minds are designed to work. Bo understands that and he embraces it and he's a better person for it. But because this is considered not masculine, he's not considered manly. And that is one of the reasons why he's hanging out with a bunch of princesses who can reward this side of behavior, or at the very least not shove him out. There's a part where he realizes,
that doesn't make any sense. Everyone here is a princess. I'm like the only one who's not a princess.
And this is kind of realizing that the culture that women have is more beneficial towards him. And he doesn't use that as an excuse to denounce masculinity, but embrace it even more so he can be strong for his friends and help protect them when they need it. It makes sense that he would be kicked out of masculine spaces. So this is why Bo is a super important character for representation, because despite not being gay, he helps represent or give lens to what life would look like for a gay black man. And that's what a lot of, like, straight white dudes don't get. They don't understand how Bo not being a caricature of black culture is a good thing. They don't understand that. They don't understand how Bo is so feminine that it makes sense that he would be with the cast of characters he is with. This makes more sense than if he was a straight white dude, because he's hanging out with a group of other marginalized people. It would be weird if he wasn't marginalized in some way himself. So Bo, being a double minority in this way, it makes perfect sense why he is hanging out with the people that he is. This makes more sense than if they didn't change Bo at all. And that is why it is perfect. They made Bo so much better by making him more feminine and making him black. And I know that sounds weird, but a lot of people don't understand how it's so good. They just see, oh, white dude became black dude. It's blackwashing. Therefore, it's racist. No, it's fucking the opposite. Oh my god. Ugh. You might have noticed that in the thumbnail, I had I think it was the Pan-African flag, because Bo being black is really important. And then the other one, a lot of people won't recognize because gray, white, and a light shade of blue, is the Demi Boy flag. And a lot of people don't know what that is. And even if it's not like a canonical good descriptor, or if like Nate showed up and was like, yo, I wouldn't describe Bo as a Demi Boy, I would like to explain how this is also really good representation, and it harkens back to the Bo not being gay but being very feminine. To elaborate on that, Bo is a guy, he identifies that way, and a lot of the people around him are girls. And then there's also Double Trouble in the show, who is non-binary. So Double Trouble rejects being put into the box of either gender. Glimmer embraces femininity. Micah embraces masculinity, even though he has long hair, and that's technically not heteronormative, but let's go along with that. Same goes with Angelo. She just embraces femininity. Adora, she's a woman, and she has a lot of masculine traits, and that is really good. And that's one of the reasons that people like her as a lesbian, because it expands that box where you can be a woman and still like and do masculine things. Just like Bo, you can be a man but still like and do feminine things. It broadens the box on what being a man and a woman means. So these two characters, Bo and Adora, overlapping a little bit is perfect. And being demi-boy means kind of identifying with the box of being a male, but like also identifying somewhat with the non-binary box, or not identifying with either, but you as a person fall in between these two ideas of people. Like, for example, a lot of people for pronouns would be like he, him, they, them, she, her. A demi-boy could go by he, him, and they, them, because they would be more comfortable with either. Or maybe they're not comfortable with he, him, or they would prefer they, them, but they still embrace masculine things and like to portray themselves as boy to society. And because Bo is expanding this box of embracing femininity and not letting that hinder his masculinity, I like the idea that he leans into the demi-boy category. I am basically headcanoning Bo as demi-boy, until anybody says anything otherwise. Anyways, a quick fun fact before I go away. Part of the reason why rap culture developed was because after Jim Crow ended, a lot of black schools were still underfunded and there were no music programs. So a lot of black kids did not have access to any instruments or learning music theory and whatnot. And so there's a lot of black communities where they had to kind of form their knowledge of music and create music all on their own. So in an environment where they did not have any formal learning, they just decided to make music on their own. And that's where beatboxing and rap music started to be birthed. Just a bunch of black kids after school shooting the shit, having fun, making their own form of music without funding from the government because they're too underprivileged to have grown up that way. And it became so popular among black communities that the people in power picked it up and blasted it throughout the airwaves, which gave black people time to shine. But it also ended up being a curse as well, as people were able to take this and use this to frame what black culture looks like, which perpetuated racism towards black people. So anyway, so that's a little bit of history on how rap music started in the first place. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed any part of this video, I would love it if you were to like and subscribe. Let me know if there's any other characters you'd like us to cover. I know that some people say that Perfuma is supposed to be like an iteration of Native Americans, or like Mermista is indicative of like Indian culture. I'm not sure about that stuff. I would need to do a lot more research on it because I live in America and I listen to a lot of rap music, and I'm aware of there's just rampant misogyny and not fitting into the box of masculinity. And I look at Bo and I'm like, oh, I'm so glad that they don't fit into the box of masculinity. This is good. Anyways, I'm just rambling now. Thank you for watching. Have a lovely day, and I'll see you in the next one.